I really am not exaggerating when I say I have been waiting for this moment for a long time. And I think, oh, where's your mic? Yeah, sorry about that. In fact, just today, Captain, rather yesterday, I was out, getting some stuff on the local grocery. And I met someone who said to me, oh, Lirandzu, you know what? I'm not able to come. I want to, but I have a flight. I have to go to Japan. But you know that you are literally going to be sitting down with the most famous pilot in the world. And you know what? Do you believe that?
No. And you're absolutely right. I don't like that word influencer business. I like that maybe I'm a teacher, yeah. This influencer, that term is just, yeah, doesn't go well with me anyway. So I'm not an influencer. I just do what I do. I share knowledge.
But you know, a lot of influencers, Captain, are people that are using social media to influence. And I get it, right? Because sometimes it's been diluted so much, the word influencer. But being influential is something else. But I'm quite interested in why you've chosen to use social media as a platform to bring us into the cockpit. When I say us, I mean everyone, all the 190,000 people that follow you just on Instagram only. Why do you choose to do this? And why do you think we're so interested?
I think it's one of the mysteries when I think of aviation. It's one of those things that people just think is a little bit of a mystery. Over the years, the only time that people would interact with aviation is when they hear there's an aircraft crash. Then they'll watch the news, an airplane crashed. But nobody actually finds out what the intricacies or what's behind the scenes. So I thought, it might be a good idea to just share some of that. And I posted a couple of videos on Instagram in the beginning, had a good response. I said, people are obviously interested in this sort of thing, but not the interests that the influencers try and push out, as in, here I am, I've just walked into my hotel now, this is my bed, and this, and none of that crap. Just proper stuff about passing on knowledge, that sort of thing. That's why I hate the influencer bit.
Well, I didn't say it. I said
you're
influential. Yeah. But Captain, tell me about your ethos. When I spoke to you, you mentioned that, in fact, when you're secretive, it could be quite dangerous in aviation. The reason why you are so hell-bent on sharing information is actually because it keeps aviation safe. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it does. For those of you that aren't in aviation but work in the corporate world, for example, knowledge is power. So the more knowledge you have and you don't share, the better it will be for you when you go to the boardroom or the next meeting, because you're the one that's going to bring out the information. You're not going to share it because it benefits you. In aviation, it's absolutely the opposite. The more stuff you keep to yourself, the more dangerous you're making the aviation industry. So the more you share anything that happens to you or any knowledge that you gain, the better it is. So you're not being smart by keeping any knowledge to yourself. You're actually being smart by telling everyone, if anything happened to you or any knowledge you gain, it's best to share it, because that is going to save the day one day, because you've passed on that information. Yeah. Whereas maybe in other industries, in the corporate world, I'm not going to tell them I did the work, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. So but then again, it doesn't have the same impact if you keep the information to yourself. It takes a long time for it to have an impact anyway. So in aviation, the thing we don't have with things happen up there is time.
Right. And we'll get into that, Captain. We'll get into your passion, your love for aviation, which is very obvious and really commended. But I want to start in the beginning. I always start in the beginning. I feel like stories start from, is little Obet running around, right? But I want to get to the part around your upbringing. You were born from a dad that's a chef and a mom who was an entrepreneur. And circumstances had you move from Zimbabwe to Zambia.
Yep.
Pick it up from there. What are some of the things that were quite normal as you were growing up, and then you realize the older you got that, wait, this is actually quite unusual?
Well, the things that were normal, obviously, are growing up, and you grow up and you're a kid and you play around with everybody else. And changing countries doesn't affect you when you're a child. You're just changing a country because that's where your parents go. So that bit didn't change. The only thing that changed for me that became different is when my parents moved to Zambia, at some point they sent me off to boarding school, which is a strange concept for a lot of people in some countries. But they sent me off to boarding school. And from a young age, I think I ended up having to mature, if you like, be capable of doing a lot of things by myself. You know, about maybe 2-3 years ago, there was a famous American military general who retired, and his speech went viral because he said in his speech that if you want to be successful in life, when you get up in the morning, the first thing you must do is make your bed. Okay? And it went viral. It went on all the stations. It was on the TV, everywhere, on his retirement speech. And he's just saying, think about being responsible. The first thing you do, be responsible. And it's funny enough, when I first went growing up to boarding school, the first thing matron taught me and several other kids that had just gone to that boarding school is how to make your bed properly, how to make the corners properly, and how to tuck it in properly. I've never forgotten it. I can still do it today. But yeah, it's strange the things that you pick up. But just growing up is interesting because you're free and you don't have any stresses, that you just have fun, go to school, come back home, play with your friends, sleep. It's just a strange concept when you compare it to adulthood.
Right. And in your youth, what is it that was celebrated in your household? And what was it that was maybe not, was frowned upon?
Like all African parents, education was always the first thing that they talked about. When you got home from school and it was holiday time, let's have a look at your report then, because they always gave you a report. And that was the first thing. You sat down and the report was opened and you're sitting there, and they never said anything about the things where you did well. It's always the ones that you did well. So why did you get only 57 in this subject?
Yeah.
You see, I told you don't concentrate, even though there's 7 other subjects you've done well in. It's just that one, that they're talking about. That, I knew you've got to concentrate, especially this holiday. I don't want to see this kind of result again. That's the sort of thing you had. Fortunately, I was just one of those that liked school anyway, so I never had that kind of report. My reports were generally pretty good, I would say.
Do you remember a time that you felt proud as a kid? The first time that you were proud of something that you did as a kid?
Let me have a look. I'm just thinking of so many things that I thought I was pretty good at. Well, as a kid, I remember riding my bicycle at speed with my arms like this, both arms. And I went pretty much for 2 kilometers like that. And I got off the bike at the end and I thought, yeah, I'm a cool guy. Yeah, just little things. I even now I remember it. I remember doing that. I remember the road. I remember what it looked like, and I remember just riding with my arm, just feeling. Yeah, right. I remember that. Yeah, Dakota DC-3. Yeah. Yeah, no, I actually saw it first time going to boarding school. It was my first time in an aeroplane as well. So my dad died, and my mom was now on her own. My mom had a small business. My dad used to work in this hotel place. My mom had a small business, little shop in a small town called Mansa. And And because she had 3 children, myself and 2 brothers. My 2 brothers were a little bit younger, so I was the older one. So she said, well, if I send him off to boarding school, the other 2, it'll be easier to look after 2 kids. And immediately my brother came of age, he went to boarding school as well. That was the thinking then. So we went to the airport in Mansa, and there was this DC-3 parked. And you walked to the airplane. There was no such thing as aero bridges and so on that you get now. You sort of walked from the terminal to the aeroplane. As we were walking to the aeroplane, we came around the front, and I saw it. It sat on its tail like this, the DC-3. And I looked up. I could see what I later knew was the captain, because he was sitting in the left seat. I saw them preparing, and I saw the big wheels on the DC-3, and I said, wow, this is, yeah.
Do you remember
I was
what
in
was
awe,
going
if you
through?
like.
Yeah.
I was just in awe. I was just thinking, wow. I mean, it looked, I looked at the airplane, and I thought, I almost thought it had a mind of its own. It was breathing. It was a creature on its own that was just being controlled. Probably is sometimes, you know. So I looked at it, I just said, wow, you know. And I felt like it was looking at all of us coming in on board. Anyway, as a kid, I was just pretty impressed, looking up and saying.
And your fascination grew and grew and grew to a point where you were spending so much time at the Lusaka airport.
Yeah. On weekends, I would go there and just sit there on Saturdays. Because when you're aboard there, you get a chit from the housemaster after breakfast on Saturday. Whereas the day scholars obviously went home. But the boarders, if you wanted to go out, Saturday was the day you could go out. And all my friends would go to the cinemas to watch movies in town and so on. But you got a chit that said you're a bona fide student and you've been allowed out for the day. You had to get back to school at 6 o'clock in the evening. So my friends would get the chit to go and watch the flicks, as we called it then. Not a movie, we called it the flicks. When I say that, my good lady says, you're showing your age. Anyway, the flicks. And the flicks comes from, in the old days, when cinema started, there were cards that had different stages of a drawing, a cartoon drawing, for example, and it was on a rotary wheel. And people would go in the street and say, would you like to watch a flick?
Wow.
And the whole story on the cards was a story played out in cards that flicked. If you flicked them at a certain rate, you could see the movement.
And there was suspense
and it was a movie.
and everything.
And it would be a movie. It would be a story in that.
Okay.
So it was called the flicks because they flicked round.
Does anybody
Okay.
know what a flick is? Okay, there's 1 or 2.
There's some people at the back there. Yeah. And yeah, so that was the flicks.
Okay.
But it just carried on. You know, now it's obviously the movies or Netflix or whatever, but that's not what it was then.
Netflix. Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
But so instead of you going to watch the flicks like all the other boys your age,
Yeah, I used to get a letter
Yeah.
that said I was a student at the school and I wanted to visit the airport and so on. So I used to take that to the security office at the airport. And the security office at the airport were always very good. They always would look at this letter with a school stamp and they'd take me airside. And normally there were aeroplanes that would come in long haul, parked at on the apron. And they would take me in the aeroplane, would go in the aeroplane, and there'd be cleaners cleaning the aeroplane, but everybody's gone off, and I'd go in there. The policeman would say, oh, do you want to look in the cockpit? Would just stand. I wouldn't sit in the seat, but I'd just stand there and look at the cockpit. I remember going in the Alitalia DC-8s, BOAC VC-10s, Zambia Airways aeroplanes, and then would go around to engineering. I'd just be walking with this policeman with me.
Wow.
He'd take me around, and yeah. And then as I got older, my mom bought me a tape recorder. Anybody knows what a tape recorder is?
Yes.
Well, a tape recorder, if you don't know what the original tape recorders were quite large, quite big. And then later on, of course, the tape recorder evolved and it became the smaller tapes that all the reporters hold in front of a politician talking.
Yes.
They'd have these little recorders. That's the tape recorder. That's the one. But I had a bigger one, which you could play music on as well. It wasn't just a recorder. in that sense. So what I did, after I did the tour of the airport with the policeman, I'd go upstairs to the viewing deck. They used to have a viewing deck. Most airports those days had viewing decks, and it wasn't as restricted security-wise to just sit there and the airplanes would be right here, even at Heathrow. At Heathrow had a viewing deck on the top, and people just used to sit there watching airplanes, and you could almost touch them. They were just there. So I would go up there with my tape recorder, with 2 blank tape recorders. I remember I used to buy the 120 2-hour ones,
Right.
which I'd then press record, and I'd record everything that was going on the apron.
Wow.
Engine starting, pushing back, or just coming into land, the reverse thrust, all the engines and so on. And then I'd go back to school and play back the tape with my friends and say, okay, listen here, you guys, listen to this. That's a Viscount. That's a VC-10. That's a DC-8, and that sort of thing.
And what would their response be when you're doing this?
Well, one of my friends wanted to be a pilot too, so they would ask me, okay, what's that? And even in class, I would be like that.
Oh, wow.
I ended up having the nickname Boeing. At secondary school now, I was Boeing, but I knew the sounds of the airplane. I didn't need to look outside, I just knew what airplane it was.
Right.
An airplane would go by, and a few of the teachers would say, Obet, what airplane is that? And I'll say, that sounds like a Lockheed.
Wow.
Hercules. And for sure, if we looked out, it was a Lockheed.
Right.
I just knew.
Right.
Yeah.
And when
That's
you say you just knew, did you also just know that this was the path that was destined for you?
Pretty
Because
much, yeah.
It's been 4 decades
Yeah.
of doing what you are doing.
Yeah.
Tell us about how it started, how the training started now, right? Now we're looking at Obet, who is clear in his mind that this is what he wants to do. You're still in Zambia.
Yes.
You then go for pilot, I would assume it's called pilot training, you'll forgive me.
Yeah.
Right. What then happens?
So I'm at secondary school, and I've got this passion building. I did have a second passion that I liked too,
What
but
was it?
not more than flying, but it was medicine or engineering. I had those two in mind. I said, if I never get into flying, I'm going to be a medical doctor, or I'll do engineering.
Right.
I'll do one of those. But I did all the science subjects that were available at the school at the time. I did all the maths. I did the maths, additional maths, physics, chemistry, biology, agricultural science. Anything that had science in it is what I did. But I also had history, and obviously we had to do English and so on. But I just stuck with the
Right.
science-based ones. But while I was at school, the Zambian system then, you see, because Zimbabwe wasn't independent,
Right.
you either had British Overseas Territories passport, similar to what Hong Kong had, okay, or you could apply and see if you could get a Zambian passport. So my mom and my brother, my older brother, he was a stepbrother, my same father, different mom, but he had the British overseas passport. And my mom said, no, if you want to do anything here, let's see if we can just apply for you to get a Zambian passport. So the process went through. I got a Zambian passport at the time. And because of the Zambian passport that I got, I managed to get into the University of Zambia. At the University of Zambia, a month into the engineering field that I went into, because there was no flying, I got into the engineering school. A month into that, there was an advert by the Zambia Air Service Training Institute for pilots. They wanted 10 cadet pilots. And when I went for I managed to get in for the interview. Out of the 10 cadet pilots, there were 3,000 applicants. Yeah. I remember where we went for the interview was near the university itself, the University of Zambia. It was near the humanities block. That's where the interviews were being carried out. Anyway, I went there, and yeah, over 4 days they were going to interview 3,000 candidates for 10 places. I was in on the second day. On the second day I went in, and they had an aptitude test, they had a maths test, they had what they called, not quite logic, they called them shapes in those days. Which is the same as the logic thing, but it's shapes, matching shapes with just to see how quickly you can match.
Okay.
Yeah, different. Yeah. Then they had just a normal chit chat with 4 people on the panel and so on. So I didn't have any problems with those. It was just all of us were worried about the chit chat. What are they going to ask you? Because you don't know.
Yeah.
You know. But I remember, and a few friends of mine actually laughed at this, but that's probably what got me the position of one of those 10 is one of the interviewers, who happened to be the chief instructor at the school that was looking for the 10 candidates, asked me the very last question. He said, "Oh, before you go, can you spell the word discotheque for me?" That's what he said.
Okay.
And the reason I think, when I look back, is because if I ask a lot of kids, even now, I ask them to spell discotheque, they spell it as DISCOTEK,
Oh, okay.
which is actually not the correct spelling. Yeah, and a lot of people spelled it like that in my era.
Okay.
And I'm thinking, this guy was just trying to see whether I pay attention to detail,
Right.
which came to play an important part throughout my career.
Of course.
Attention to detail,
Right.
all the time.
Yeah.
I never forgot it. But so I spelt it. He said, "Oh, thank you very much." You know, so
How do you spell
well,
it?
well, that's my son. How do you spell? How do you spell discotheque? Yeah. Because we discussed it before. Yeah, but yeah, I think after that took a week, and I was in at a college at Lusaka International Airport.
Right. And there's a part of you that talks about just how important the training that you got or rather you starting your aviation career in Zambia, how that really shaped a lot of the outcome that we see now. We'll get into that, but I want to just do a little timeline dive, right? Because you're now in aviation school. In 1971, you actually applied to join Air Rhodesia, but you returned away.
Yeah.
Because you didn't have enough hours.
This was a 1981, did you say?
71.
No. This would have been 81.
91, okay.
81.
81,
Yeah,
all right. And
it was just towards the end of 1980, just after independence, actually.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. They said, "Oh, you don't have enough hours. We need people with 1,000 hours." I had at that time about 680. Yeah, something like that.
Which was kind of a blessing in disguise because Ethiopian Airlines came calling.
Yeah.
And they were looking for people like you to join them. Tell us about that.
So Ethiopian Airlines took over the running of Zambia Airways management. And they asked Zambia Airways if they had any people they knew that would want to go to Ethiopia and be co-pilots on the DC-3. So I put my hand up and 5 other friends of mine put their hands up and we went to Ethiopia. Ethiopian Airlines did a conversion course for us on the DC-3. First time I was sitting in a big aeroplane and I'm looking at this aeroplane and I'm saying, yeah. I just harked back to my childhood when I first saw this aeroplane as a kid. Little did I know that I'd come around and fly it one day. Yeah.
But working for Ethiopian Airlines, Captain, changed a lot of things for you. You talk about representation, the fact that you were flying next to a black captain.
Yeah.
And how the airline was very deliberate in terms of making aviation accessible to many people. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, the thing is, when I was flying in Zambia, whenever I went back home on holidays, I flew Zambia Airways. But Zambia Airways, the flight decks were all Caucasians in the flight deck. But I never thought much of it because in your mind you're just thinking, oh, okay, those are the pilots and so on. You don't think much of it. But when I went to Ethiopia, the first thing I noticed was every single captain, every single other pilot that I flew with was Ethiopian or an African or something. So I thought, okay, so this is actually something that, is happening now. I don't think it was anything the governments at the time did because these countries were coming out of colonialism. So the colonial governments, of course, brought its people in, and those are the people that were pilots in Zambia Airways, in Rhodesia, in South Africa, everywhere.
Yeah.
Because whoever was in control controlled the narrative at the time.
Right.
Yeah, so it was nice to go to Ethiopia and actually see that I'm flying with other black pilots. Yeah, the senior pilots I was flying with, my instructors, were all Africans.
Yeah. But they also had a very interesting business model, Captain. You
I think I mentioned it to you before, right?
You saw, you saw how they basically ensured that aviation, or having access to an airplane, wasn't just for the elite. It was ensured that people could have access to a very rural Ethiopia.
Yeah.
Tell us about what we could learn from that. How do they even manage to do that? How do they manage to make everyone be able to fly? I know where I come from. So, sorry, just to elaborate. Like, I know where I come from. When I was young, getting on an airplane was a big deal.
Oh yeah, it's a big deal. Yeah.
And yet you go and you work for Ethiopian Airlines, and you realize that you can come in with your chicken, a live chicken, and fly to the next city because you could.
Yeah,
you could.
And that's one thing I always say. I was in a similar sort of interview back home in Zimbabwe, and they asked me a similar question, and they said, I think Ethiopian Airlines got the model right because they took aviation to the people. They didn't leave aviation as something out there. In Ethiopia, when I flew the DC-3, it was mostly domestic to all their little strips in the rural areas of Ethiopia. And maybe Ethiopia is helped by the rugged terrain that it has, that it's not easy to make roads and train networks. The only way to get to certain places is to fly. But the point is, you can go to the smallest village in Ethiopia, small province, and there's an airport there, and the DC-3 went there. And ordinary people, just ordinary people, some with no shoes, got on with, bought a ticket, got on board, and the DC-3 had, some of them were C-47s, they had canvas seats.
Right.
That when you stood up, they just went up to the side.
Yeah.
They're made of canvas.
Right.
And a lap strap, that's it. And you'd see, I saw people coming in with their, I don't know if you know them, you'll know it, but some people here won't know it. But there's little cages where you put a chicken or two. Yeah, people would get on board with that.
What do you think? Yeah. What do you think I would know that, Captain? I'm kidding. Yeah,
no,
absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw that. I saw people in Ethiopia. It was not a big deal to say I went on an aeroplane.
Yeah, and this is back in the 80s.
Yes, all the way back then.
What can we learn, Captain, do you think, from this sort of business model when we look at how, some carriers are struggling, especially national carriers?
Yeah.
We won't mention names, but we know who they are, that are struggling. But yet you get this airline that is still thriving to this day, by the way. I mean, Ethiopian Airlines is an airline that you can, rely on right now.
Yeah.
What can we learn from a business model that they're using?
Don't make it elitist. Make it available to everybody. And people will come. It's the same model as McDonald's. From when they started, McDonald's started to make it cheap enough for anybody to walk into McDonald's and afford a burger.
Right.
It's changed somewhat now, but that was the model they started with. Make it affordable for an ordinary person, working class, to come into any McDonald's shop and there's something they can afford.
Right.
You've got to do that. Or you stick to your Michelin star. But then you're going to a niche market, which usually dies down when the economy changes.
Yeah.
But if you stick it low for everybody to achieve it, I think you get better results. That's what I think, anyway.
So, sticking to this particular point, and it's very interesting for me, right? And I've mentioned how we've seen, national carriers, being rescued again and again and again. And you talk about how, accessibility is probably the key to running an effective airline. But you also talk about it's important to run an airline like a business. Tell us more about that.
No, I only spoke about that in the context of where I come from. A lot of companies in Africa are state-owned, and the state interferes a lot in the running of the airline. You see, Ethiopian Airlines is got state control to some degree, but the state leaves it alone.
Yeah.
So it's a business unit out there, and it makes its own results, and it may report to the government and say, this is what we've done and so on. But the government really is not hands-on in it. They just leave it alone.
And not interfere.
They don't interfere. It's a little bit like a local airline here. It really is the de facto airline of Hong Kong, but it's on its own. It runs the business as a business.
Yeah.
You know, for the first time after COVID, they ended up having some assistance and so on, but that was unusual circumstances.
Right.
Yeah. But it's a business. It just does its own thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, when you do that, you know, you promote accountability, you
Yeah.
promote paper trails, you promote a model, a working model
Yeah.
that actually services people
Yeah.
and not just, you know.
Yeah.
But moving on, Captain. So you join Zimbabwe.
Yep.
You finally come home
Yeah.
in '82, and you join Zimbabwe.
Zimbabwe,
And also Zimbabwe has just gained independence.
Yeah, a year
I
and
mean,
a half or so.
Can you
earlier,
paint
yeah.
a picture for me of, you know, just you in your captain suit and flying your national carrier, and of course, you know, Zimbabwe has just gained independence. What was the mood like at that point?
No, the mood then was actually, for those of you who don't know the history of Zimbabwe, because it was Rhodesia at the time, and then the liberation struggle liberated the country, and the country got independent. So Zimbabwe used to have an air force, still does, but it was the Rhodesian Air Force then. But the Rhodesian Air Force was mostly all Caucasian pilots, some of them coming back down to the heritage of the original colonialists that came and settled in what was southern Rhodesia at the time. In the airline industry, to move ahead, to get promoted, the flying side, not the corporate side, on the flying side, get promoted, a seniority system is established, and nearly all airlines have a seniority system. Seniority systems are based on the date that you joined. So when I joined Air Zimbabwe, and the date that you joined, by the way, is what determines when you're going to be promoted to be a captain.
Okay.
So if the airline, for example, if you've got 10 aeroplanes and you need 10 captains per aeroplane, and you've got 100 captains, and then you've got 10 first officers per aeroplane, and you've got obviously 100 first officers, there's no room for anybody to be promoted to be a captain, right? Because you've already got the numbers that you need.
Right.
So you're waiting for dead man's shoes, as it were.
Wow.
So that somebody dies, then the most senior of the first officers, the most senior of the first officers gets promoted.
Were there a lot of unsolved deaths?
No. The reason I'm telling you is this. You know, the people who colonize the country usually have agendas to protect themselves.
Of course.
So now, Zimbabwe is getting independent. The same pilots that were in the Rhodesian Air Force that were bombing the black Africans who were fighting for independence.
Right.
The country now gets independent. The same pilots that were in the Air Force leave the Air Force and all join Air Zimbabwe.
The airline, yeah.
So the airline is now full. So I come along and I want to join, and the first thing the director of flight operations, I remember his name, is a chap called Tony Garner, actually a very nice man, actually. He said to me, we actually don't have any space for any more first officers and so on, because everybody left the Air Force and joined the airline and filled it completely.
Right.
Almost as if somebody in the airline said, you guys had better leave the Air Force because these Africans are coming here and they're taking over the country. So it's no use you being in the Air Force. You're not fighting for anything. You better come here to the airline, get your experience, and you better be ready to bail out, get some civilian flying time. Right. And that's exactly what happened. I know that's what happened. They know that's what happened. So when I came, they said there wasn't any room. And it took the Minister of Transport to actually say, no, any black African that comes to join the airline, if they have the qualifications, as in 1,000 hours,
Right.
which I just got. In fact, when I joined Air Zimbabwe, I had 998 hours.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So he said any black African that comes should be taken in to the airline. The airline, of course, argued, all white, all ex-Air Force and so on, all argued, said, no, we don't need them because this is the quota that we need. These are the airplanes we have, these are the routes, so we don't need any extra pilots and so on, because again, that's protecting them. And anyway, when they took me on, they said, well, the seniority still stands, so I joined the bottom of the queue. So obviously I was the most junior pilot in the airline. What the minister basically said to the airline is that there were no African pilots, black African pilots, that could have joined the Rhodesian Air Force during the time of Rhodesia. For you to say, we've got some black African pilots that were in the Rhodesian Air Force that can join Air Zimbabwe,
Right.
just as the whites have been doing,
Right.
because they were not allowed to join the Air Force and fly. So that opportunity wasn't there. If that opportunity had been there, then that argument would have stood. But the opportunities to become a pilot in the Air Force or any of the airlines in Rhodesia at the time were not available to black Africans. It was simple as that.
Yeah. The playing fields were just not
Was
even.
totally different. So that's how it ended up, that any black pilot that was available, that in fact there were none. There were only 3, then myself, and then somebody else joined later. And it took another 8 years or so before the airline sent some to go and train.
I can
So it
imagine there
yeah.
was resistance as well. I
Oh,
can,
yeah.
I can imagine it wasn't a
Yeah,
smooth
yeah.
sailing.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't.
Because it's a decision that wasn't very favorable, especially for the people that were once the oppressors and now they're getting the jobs, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, we're glad that you got that job, Captain, and
Yeah.
we're glad that many your fellow countrymen are getting these jobs now in current day, and many of them are here actually, but we'll get into that. I want to talk about your last flight for Air Zimbabwe. And the reason why I want to talk about it is because you left because of your lived experiences. It wasn't because you hated your job. It wasn't because you got
No, I
bored.
loved the job, best job.
But
Air Zimbabwe,
but
yes.
something pushed you. What
Yeah.
was that?
I didn't see a future in terms of, the way I looked at life is I needed a job where I could work and just earn a salary, save money for a pension, retire at the end of it, and be able to live on my pension.
Yeah.
That was my vision of what life should be. When I was in Air Zimbabwe, at this stage when I left, I was a Boeing 707 captain. I'd just become a training captain, in fact, on it. I was a Boeing 707 captain, and I was, to make ends meet, I was still having to go on my flights to London, buy stuff to come back and sell to be able to live for the month.
So basically, you had a side hustle.
Yeah, yeah. I had to hustle, and I just didn't think that was the way things were. I looked at the Western world, I looked at everywhere else, and I saw people just go to work. When they finished work, they went home. They were with family on weekends, they were on weekends. When they retired, they had a package, and they retired, and they went on holidays, and they said, that's what I'm looking for, that's what I want. I don't want to have to hustle.
Yeah.
If I hustle, then I'm doing it because it's a hobby or it's just something I want to do. But I didn't want that kind of life. So I started looking around everywhere.
There's a story that I picked up on because obviously I was doing my research before this conversation.
Yeah.
And you talk about how you had to catch taxis after you landed your plane.
Yeah, that was my last flight with Air Zimbabwe. 707 was Air Zimbabwe's biggest airplane. We used to carry just under 200 people. And one of the most popular flights, still is now, is Harare, Johannesburg and back. And my very last flight, I did a Harare, Johannesburg. It was full going there, and coming back, we left Joburg it always left at 16:45, landed in Harare at 1805 or something like that. And I remember the flight was so full, and there was a lady we had on the jump seat. She sat in the jump seat. That's how full the aeroplane was.
What's the jump seat?
It's a seat in the cockpit, a spare seat that's in the cockpit.
that we can just sit on?
Yeah.
Like I can go and sit on that seat?
Yeah, but you need permission from the captain through the airline system.
This is something in the 80s, right? Like this is not happening now.
Yeah. It used to happen until COVID.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Did you
Yeah.
guys know about the jump seat?
Yeah.
You can sit with the pilot?
Yeah, you could. It just stopped recently.
Wow.
Because of security and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, you could sit, if the flight was full, the traffic passenger handling services people would come to the captain and say, Captain, we've got 2 passengers, they've got to go, the flight is full. Do you mind releasing the jump seat?
So the jump seat can take 2 people?
There were 2 on the 707.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there were 2. There was captain, co-pilot, first officer, and 2 other seats in the cockpit.
And now they just offload us, right? Like.
Otherwise, if I said no, then that was it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So normally, yeah, those were the jump seats. But I remember the flight was full. Even the jump seats were taken. And we landed in in Harare. We went through arrivals, immigration, and then I went out, took my stripes off and so on, and I went out to the road, and I remember the passengers that I flew, some of them must have driven past saying, isn't that the captain that brought us in? And here I was doing this to go home. Yeah, I'm hiking.
And you knew at that point, like, no,
oh, yeah.
this is not going to work.
No, actually, I didn't mind that because I'd got the job here already.
Oh.
But that was my last flight.
Right.
Yeah, and I said, yeah, this is the stuff I'm getting away from. I just don't want to do this.
Right.
This is not on. I should come, as a senior captain, I should be able to just come out, get in a car and drive home.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Why is it that, pardon me, Captain, why is it that you were not able to afford a car? I mean, I really want to understand. I want to understand what is it? Was the pay low?
Yeah, the pay was low.
Different priorities?
Yeah. No, the pay was low. Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely, pay was low. Yeah. Pay was definitely low, for sure. Yeah.
All right. So, Captain, let's now jump. We are in Hong Kong. You have your break. You're now transitioning from Air Zimbabwe and you're coming to Cathay. What?
No, originally I came to Air Hong Kong.
Oh, okay.
Just before Cathay, I came to Air Hong Kong. That was the company I came to.
Right.
And Air Hong Kong was flying the Boeing 707 out of Kai Tak. And they so happened to get a new aeroplane, another 707, and needed type-rated pilots for the 707. And I was it. So I came straight in here. You know, these things happen for a reason. While I was before I came here, I went to a Christmas party a few months earlier with my good lady wife here. We weren't married then, but but she was with me. We went there's a golf club called Chapman Golf Club. And over there was the previous chief pilot of Air Zimbabwe, who was now the chief pilot here of Air Hong Kong. So he was there, and I met him, and I said, jokingly, I said to him, are there any jobs in Hong Kong?
And he said yes.
And he said, funny you should ask me that because we've just got another 707. We're looking for 707 pilots that are already rated. I said, well, count me in, I want a job. He said, are you sure you want a job? I said, yes, I do. He said, will you leave? I said, I will leave now. So he said, no, if you're serious, I'll send you, when I get back to Hong Kong, I'll send you the application form, fill it in, we'll have a chit chat on the phone, and then we'll invite you over to Hong Kong and you can have an interview there. So when he got back here, those days, there was no emails or anything, so he sent the forms by DHL. DHL was there then, he sent the forms, I filled them in, I sent them back on DHL, yeah, and then he called me on the phone, or his secretary called on the phone and said, there's two, the chief training captain and somebody else, who was it? Somebody in training wanted to talk to me. And I talked to them on the phone. And then a day later, he called me, he said, okay, so you've got the job, when can you come? I said, next week. Yeah. Even though I had to give 3 months notice to Air Zimbabwe. They owed me like 5 weeks leave. So I said, 5 weeks leave, I'll forfeit the rest and
It's
the salary,
okay.
it's okay.
I have to ask, did
Yeah.
they ask you to spell discotheque?
No, no, they didn't. But I'll tell you what. When I came here, I remember I told you. I said the first 3 weeks I was here, I remember getting my first paycheck, and she was living in England then, and the first paycheck, and I got the pay slip. I looked at it. I'll tell you what I used to get in Zimbabwe. I used to get 630 pounds a month equivalent as a senior captain on the Boeing 707. I came here as a first officer. Even though I was a senior captain, I joined here as a first officer in Air Hong Kong. But the chief pilot had told me, he said, look, I know you're a captain, but you're coming in as a first officer. Remember I told you about dead man's shoes? There were 2 senior captains who were going to retire. He says, you'll be in line for that, so don't worry. It's going to be... Anyway, I was captain again 5 months later. I was back in the left seat. So, yeah. So what happened is I got this check, and I remember speaking to her on the phone. I said, I just got my first salary, and it was 3,600 pounds. And I was like, wow. And at Kai Tak, there used to be an HSBC. It wasn't HSBC then, it was just called Hong Kong Bank. And I'd opened an account there, and I went in there sort of, chest out. Yeah, and yeah, it was such a nice feeling that here I was. And I hadn't even flown yet. I'd gone to Australia to get the license. They used to have a simulator in Sydney, which was run by Qantas. And I did the simulator there and all that. And yeah, just like that, I was here and I was in.
Right.
Yeah.
I really want to talk to the profession itself right now, Captain. And I think we've done a really great job just getting to know you better around, your upbringing.
Yeah.
You've had really amazing anecdotes and funny moments, and we really appreciate you sharing this with us. But I want to talk about the 40 flawless years in the skies that we often, say, and we don't really contextualize, right?
We had some dicey moments. I had some.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
I can imagine that. But, 35 years of these 40 years, you've literally been in the cockpit.
Yeah.
And I would like to know, Captain, and of course you're also an instructor and you're a trainer, right?
Yeah.
And you've seen all the colors and shapes of people that come and want to be good captains and good pilots naturally. What do you look for in a young pilot?
For a young pilot, I'm looking at somebody who's looking at doing the best at what he's doing at that present moment. He or she is not thinking of over there. He or she is thinking of here, what I'm doing right now, the present moment. In life, people talk about the present moment. So keep the present moment. I always say to them, which is the best flying aeroplane or flying machine right now? The best flying machine in the world is whatever aeroplane you're flying at that time. No other aeroplane is the best flying machine.
Right.
Whatever aeroplane you're flying at that time. Don't say, oh, I think so and so. The aeroplane you're flying right now is the best aeroplane. If you leave this aeroplane and start flying that one, that becomes the best aeroplane, because that's the only way you're going to fly it properly.
Do you find that people are often not in the moment?
Oh, some, yeah. Especially in recent times, a lot of the younger pilots are lifestyle pilots. That's what I call them.
What is that, Captain? We want to know, are they the influencers pilots?
Yeah. They're lifestyle pilots. They want to be on a particular fleet or aeroplane because it goes to certain destinations. Nothing to do with the fact that they might actually enjoy flying the aeroplane. When I was a youngster, the same age as second officers are, for example, in my previous company here. When I was a youngster, I'll give you a very good thing is in Zambia Airways, in Air Zimbabwe, in even British Airways, where I trained for my CPL and so on. When you finished flying, all you wanted to do was take off and landings, fly. That's all you wanted to do. So the fleet that did that was always the domestic and regional aeroplanes. That's where we all wanted to go. Today it's reverse. The new pilots today don't want to do any of this hop, skip, and jump to in China and so on. They don't want that. They just want to go on the 777 or A350 or 787 or whatever, and go from here and go to London, and from here to LA and spend 3 days in LA, come back here, have 5 days off. And in my time, we would have hated that. We would have been crying, calling management, can you put me on the A320? Right. Can you put me on the A321? That's where I want to be, because that's where the flying was, takeoff and landing. So that's why I call them lifestyle pilots. They want the lifestyle as opposed to wanting the profession. Doesn't mean they can't fly and they don't have the aptitude. It's just their mind is different.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with it. It's just a different mindset. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
When you were a young pilot and throughout your career, how did you deal with self-doubt in the cockpit? At that time when you are present and there is that, I guess, crack in the system. Not the system of the plane, but in your system. How did you deal with self-doubt?
Self-doubt as in, am I doing the right thing, you mean?
Yeah.
I don't know if I ever had that moment.
Wow. That's impressive.
No, I didn't.
That's
Aviation-wise, no, I didn't. I never ever had any self-doubt of, certainly not in aviation. I might have had self-doubt outside the aviation world, but not in the aviation world. I just knew. I don't know. I just knew.
How do you advise someone who does then face some sort of self-doubt while they're in that cockpit, or maybe even just within the aviation space?
What's causing it? Everything comes from the root cause. Why? What has caused the self-doubt? It's got to start from somewhere. Something started it, and then from there you can look for ways of tackling it once you know what the root cause was. Like it's similar to what they say about treating the condition rather than finding out what the root cause is.
Right.
You know, just look. The symptoms is what you treat.
Right.
Yeah, but what caused the symptoms?
Right.
What caused the self-doubt? Where did it come from? Yeah. Why has it suddenly come when it wasn't there maybe a year ago? Something's happened.
It's impressive, Captain, that you say you haven't had that moment, because you're a trailblazer. When I say that, you mean you are the first black African pilot to fly in Hong Kong skies, right? So
I think so, because when I came here, there was no other.
Correct.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm quite impressed that you say that you never have that moment, or you've never had that realization where you're doubting yourself, right?
Yeah.
But what voices have you had to learn to shut down because you are the only one, and you are also just asserting yourself and your authority in the space that no one looks like you is working in?
I think it's because I didn't think about it.
Wow.
When I left Zimbabwe, for example, my friends in Zimbabwe said to me, are you sure you're going there? It's full of Chinese people, and you know, it's a British colony. All those British people run the airlines there. Are you sure you want to go there? There'll be racism and so on. And in my mind, I just thought, if I can prove to myself and to them that I'm a professional,
yes,
all that doesn't matter. And it really didn't matter. If you're a professional and you do the right thing, you'll get there. I mean, in most professions, if you work hard and you demonstrate yourself, your ability, a lot of those things start falling away because they start looking at you differently. They start thinking, well, this chap can do it, or this lady can do this.
Right.
And it's the struggle that women all over have had to get into professions.
Right.
Oh, this lady can do it.
Right.
And it's the men saying that. But for me, what my friends told me, are you sure you want to go here? You know, there's going to be racism. You never know. And to be honest, I never had it when I came to Hong Kong. There's been some incidents where you can see that there's a little bit of it, but if you don't think about it and stick to your profession, it falls away anyway. They themselves just fall away because that's not your mindset. If you look for it, you're going to find it.
Right. But Captain,
Yeah.
there are, office politics, right? I'm sure there are cockpit politics
Yes.
because you fly with different teams,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
How did you navigate that, or how do you navigate that?
Yeah, I've had, in the old days, there were old school captains. When I was the first officer in Air Zimbabwe, there were old school captains who, some of them were bullies, some of them were just, they'd come from an era where they'd fought in the Royal Air Force, some of them, and then they'd moved with their families to Rhodesia, to an RAF outpost in Rhodesia, and then they just stayed. So some of these captains had been captains and never been first officers. Because they'd flown the Spitfire, they'd flown whatever, and they were captains all the time. So when you got in the cockpit with them, you'd take off, they would raise the landing gear themselves. If you wanted to touch the flaps, he'd bring the flaps up by himself and so on, and he'd just let you do what we call the flight log, to put in the times and so on. And even then you had to ask him, was it okay to start doing the flight log? I remember one captain took off, and above a certain level you could start doing the flight log. So I grabbed the flight log to start putting the times in, and he looked at me and he grabbed the flight log and went, and he kept flying. So I sat there, okay. I will tell you when to do the flight log. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so I just, and I remember on the Viscount, the pilot flying, okay, there's a pilot flying and pilot monitoring, as we call it. It used to be pilot not flying and pilot flying, but then everybody said, oh, but you're both flying. Why do you call him pilot not flying? So I said, okay, pilot monitoring.
Right.
Yeah. So the pilot monitoring, if the captain says, okay, it's you to fly the aeroplane, on the Viscount, there was a switch. It was on the first officer's side, which determined which autopilot would be in use, basically. But there was a switch on the right which you could move on some of the Viscounts, not all of them. Some of them had a switch. So if it was your sector, it just meant that when you engaged the autopilot on your side, it would then be controlling the airplane once you're in the cruise. But also, when you got to the aeroplane, the engine start and so on was always the captain. And then when you were ready to taxi out, as to maneuver on the ground, then you, as the first officer who was been given the sector, could then put your hand on the throttles and start adjusting thrust and taxiing the aeroplane. So I said once to the captain, I remember it was Kariba, I said, he gave me the sector, he said, okay, you fly back to Harare. I said, after the engine started, I said, okay, I said, my throttles. And he hit me on the left hand and took them off. These are my freaking throttles. This is my freaking aeroplane. That's exactly what he said. Yep. Mark,
Wow.
you'll know that.
And is that like a character flaw on the person's
No,
part?
it's just how it was in those days. The captains were kings, and people left them alone, and yeah.
And just to take it back to the ordinary man on the ground, right? Like, so, is it like being in a car and you're the driver,
Yeah.
and I then try and indicate for you? Is it that sort of like imposing, or I try and like, put on the brake for you?
Well, as a first officer, you do. In the old days, it was more you did what the captain said a lot.
Okay.
There were some things which you did automatically because that's how the system was.
Right.
Because the captain wasn't able to do them.
Right.
But certain things, you did them when the captain.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And even when you were flying, the captain made selections for you sometimes. You'd be flying and saying, right, okay, we'll take flaps 5 now. Right, okay, bring the speed back. Even though you're the one flying. You never sort of run the show. He still run it, even though you're sitting in the left seat. He just run the show.
Right.
He just told you what to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Captain, I've been enjoying this conversation so much. I realized we're running a bit over, and we probably need to take a comfort break. I want to get from you. Do you want to take a comfort break and then we come back for some questions? Because I do want to get some questions from the audience.
Questions?
And I
What questions?
also want, and I also want to talk to the man outside the cockpit. Or would you prefer that we do questions and then we have a comfort break? What do you think? Comfort break. Okay, let's have a comfort break. Let's have a 10-minute comfort break. I'm sure you also need to fill up on your drink, and then we come back.
Cheers.
Cheers. Let's just have a comfort break, and I'll come back in 10 minutes, please.